This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Innovators Podcast. This is Bob O'Donnell, not really filling in for Phil McKinney, but actually getting to host, to talk to Phil McKinney, who, of course, is the regular host of the program. Hey, Phil, how are you, by the way?
Hey, Bob, this is a little bit of a weird feeling for me in the fact that I'm the guest on my show.
Yeah, but you know what? It's all a good thing. So for those of you who are regular listeners to the program, and Phil's been doing this forever, you may have heard I've been on a couple times. Phil's had me on, and Phil and I have a history. We have an interesting history. We actually grew up in the same town in little Glenwood, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago, 187th in Halsted in my case, 185th in Halsted in Phil's case. And we played in the school band together. Yes, we're band geeks. Yeah, okay. It's just, you know
No. I have to always remind people, I was first chair baritone. Oh, you were second chair trombone.
No, that was it. There was a brief period when Bob Caruso was ahead of me, our friend Bob Caruso. But anyway, no, the reality is, yes, we've known each other a long time. But the funny story, just because we got to get this out of the way, is we hadn't seen each other in a long time, and we were, Phil at the time was CTO of HP, now HP Inc., and I was an analyst, I am still an analyst, but I was an analyst working for IDC, a big market research firm, and we were at an event sitting outside, and it was a little chilly, and there were heat lamps, and Phil said something like, "Oh, no big deal, I grew up in Chicago. I'm used to it." I said, "Oh, really? Where?" And he's like 185th in Halsted. I said, What? It's like one of those moments in life. You're like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, I grew up at 187th in Halsted, and then we started chatting. We're like, oh my God, we knew each other growing up and in junior high. Now, to be fair, Phil is way, way older. 1 year. 1 year.
1 year, dude. 1 year.
1 year. But anyway. But it's made for great stories and great laughs. Obviously, it's tremendously fun to see that we would both end up, following very different paths, but in somewhat similar kind of situations. So just a little bit on me. I actually had my own call-in radio talk show in the San Francisco Bay Area on an ABC affiliate called KSFO. Originally was called O'Donnell on Computers, and then became O'Donnell on Technology. And it was on for over 10 years, which is in the world of radio is a lifetime. But clearly, Phil has me beat once again because his podcast, now how long has it been running, Phil? 16 years?
We just finished year 15. We're starting season 16.
Now, see, the issue is I started before Phil. See, I started in 1997, but I took a break. So I ran 97 to 2007. So had I been still going, it would have been like 25 years for me. But that's okay. It's all good. Hey, look, all teasing aside, Phil's been doing this a long time. So let's talk about that. Let's talk a little bit about the history of the podcast, what you've done. How did it get started? What'd you do? What was the motivation?
Well, back in 2000, started, late 2004. I was at HP at the time, and but I had just had a conversation with my mentor, Bob Davis, who hired me out of college and really put a lot of effort into my career. And I went to 3 companies with him, and he and I actually came to the Valley the first time in the early 80s together. And I asked Bob, how do I pay him back? I've just been named CTO at HP, and how do I pay him back? And he just laughed at me, and he goes, "You can't pay me back. You got to pay it forward. You got to find a way to invest that energy into that next generation." And so I'd always been, looking for different ways to kind of leverage and share what I've been doing. And so I played around, and late March of 2005, I recorded a little test show in the bathroom at the Marriott Resort in Phoenix, Arizona. And yes, the show is still available. You can go over to the site and still find it. But that was kind of a test, and then boom, it just, in the early days of podcasting, it just took off like a rocket.
That's great. So, and what specifically did you cover? What was the idea for what you wanted to talk about? Obviously, you had a lot of experience in tech, and obviously innovation is a part of, just about everybody's job to a certain degree. But what in particular kind of drove you in the content direction that you decided to take?
Well, for me, it was really all about innovation. Everybody thinks of me as being a tech guy because of, HP and laptops and desktops and workstations and printers and whatever. But my background covers everything from, early part of my career was in wireless and mobile. So the early days of AMP Cellular, the United States in the late 80s, and all the way through to, point to multi-point, fixed wireless, satellite work, down to computer technologies. So for me, it's less about tech as it is more about innovation. And really, it's about giving people an inside look into how do you identify ideas that have potential, and then what do you do, and how do you take those ideas and turn them into really knockout, breakout kinds of products and services. It doesn't matter whether you're running a restaurant or you're running, a lawn care service, or you are, running a large multinational company providing auto insurance. The listeners to the show cover such a wide range of size and industries.
So if you've been doing it for 15 years, somebody, you're stuck in the elevator for a minute with somebody. What's your elevator pitch on innovation?
Innovation's a skill. Innovation's a capability that anybody can learn, anybody can practice, and anybody can become proficient at. This thought that it's some kind of black magic that only certain people are blessed with is absolute bogus. And I think it's a turnoff for a lot of people that don't even try. We are naturally born creative, and it's finding those channels of creative output that allows us to create and share the ideas that are rumbling around in our heads.
Well, yeah, and you point something interesting out because, again, our background, a lot of it is in tech, but it doesn't have to be tech for there to be innovation. And I think that's a point, certainly as somebody who's been engrossed in the tech business for over 20 years now as an analyst, you can lose sight of that fact. But, the reality is we are seeing it. And actually, we see it in interesting ways. We're even seeing it in when you take, and we'll see, not all of these guys are going to be successful, but companies who've decided, for example, that they're going to create razors and sell direct to consumer like a Harry's or the Warby Parkers of the world selling glasses. Those are innovative ways to tackle, frankly, a fairly mundane, arguably, business.
Well, it is. And innovation to business model has actually probably had some of the biggest impacts, right? It's, Uber didn't invent cars. They just invented a unique and different way to leverage something that everybody has that in some cases is underutilized to allow people to make money. It's the business model of Uber and Lyft that creates the business. It's not around the technology. So the ability to think differently about those kinds of disruptions is really where the breakthroughs come through.
But it's, to be clear, it's not just the thinking differently. Obviously, you have to have the idea, but, as people like to say, creativity is 5% inspiration, 95% perspiration, right? So
it's all about, it's about your willingness to experiment too, right? It's about, you got to get out there and try something. People can, write it down in an idea notebook. That's great. Value 0. Until you actually go and try something and actually experiment and do it. Look, and it's also not having that fear of failure, right?
Right.
It's the, Silicon Valley VCs, they're crushing it if they get 1 out of 10 becomes a big win. And the same thing happens whether you're a small company or a large multinational like HP. If we could do 1 out of 10, we were killing it.
Yeah, but that there is that risk that people have, and there's the fear of failure for a lot of this stuff, and people are they're not always sure. How do they best address this? How do they start to think through this, and what can they do to be aware of it? I mean, obviously we can talk about this more in the next segment, but what's your, quick pointer to say to get yourself started?
Well, I think to get yourself started, it's really about solving a problem. What problem are you having, or what problem do your customers have? And that tends to be, in some cases, a great starting point of where you get started. And if it's something that you think you can solve and think that you've got a unique perspective for, then it's your willingness to step out and try something. Try to do it in such a way that you can validate that the idea is meaningful and that you can actually fix the problem. So it isn't waiting back till some light bulb goes off. Find a problem that you can solve today.
Sounds great. Well, look, that's something we're going to discuss in just a bit. But in the meantime, we're going to take a quick break. Stick around. We'll be back. This is the Killer Innovations Podcast. Coming up soon. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Killer Innovations Podcast. I'm Bob O'Donnell, the president and chief analyst at Technalysis Research, filling in as host today, not replacing Phil, but with the pleasure of being able to interview Phil, which puts him on the spot, lets me dig in. He usually gets to do that to me when I'm on the show a couple of times a year, but now it's my turn to turn around. So, look, before we went to the break, we had started to talk about the nuts and bolts of innovation and how people need to approach it. And we talked a little bit about risk taking and people being willing to take a risk and the creativity and the effort involved in doing this. So what are the steps? I mean, companies hire you to share your ideas sometimes around innovation. What's sort of the key messages that you deliver as part of that?
Well, and we've been doing, most recently, been doing some work with the U.S. Marine Corps and Quantico and the VA hospitals, helping the government think differently about innovation. And what we teach is basically I don't want to call it steps, or it's really not a process. We call it a framework, but 4 elements of the framework. And it's really around the word FIRE, F-I-R-E. So F stands for focus. Identify the problem statement. Identify where the real challenge is at, or where you think the upside opportunity is. I always love the Albert Einstein quote that says, Albert Einstein said, if I was given 1 hour to save the world, I would spend 55 minutes identifying the problem and defining the problem, and then I'd spend 5 minutes saving the world. Actually doing it. Because we don't spend enough time really digging deep and understanding the problem space. Once you've identified that, then it's into the ideation. How do you come up with ideas? And there's a lot of arguments in the innovation, game around individual ideation, team ideation. Do you do brainstorming? And there's lots of different tools out there that are available. We actually teach a combined individual and team ideation, because you can actually generate roughly about 30% more and actually better ideas by combining those two.
Interesting.
Third step.
And just to clarify, by the way, for people, so that means when you say individual, you mean each person kind of goes off and does their own brainstorming, and then they come together and then share those as a group and then play off each other? Is that what you...
Exactly. Okay. So you're off on your own, no talking, you're whipping out your ideas. And then it's through the process of sharing that you then start seeing the sparking across teams. Like, wow, if we could do that and combine it with this, or if we can do that, what about this? And it starts then feeding on itself, versus you just try to stay in a room and someone goes, oh, well, I'm going to write everything onto a flip chart, right?
Right.
Type of thing. And that gets into the third step, which is ranking. Ranking is probably the step that very few, if any, organizations do. It's the proverbial problem of brainstorming, where you say, okay, put 10 smart people in a room. Somebody volunteers and goes, oh, I'll be the scribe. And they stand at the flip chart and they write down all the ideas. And they're good for about 20, 25 minutes, and then everything comes to a halt, right? And then what does someone do? Someone says, oh, I'll type them up. So they rip off the flip chart paper, take it back to the desk. They type it up, email it around. What happens? Nothing. Nada. Yeah. There's some email boxes that have got probably some like billion-dollar ideas that will never see the light of day. So we actually teach a process of ranking, and we actually encourage people that when you run a session that includes ideation, you rank at the exact same time. You do not leave the room until you rank. And there's different processes of ranking. There's what we call dot voting. There's what's called criteria voting. I'm a big believer in criteria voting. It's what we used at HP. We used 5 questions, 8 people in a room. You vote anonymously. And what you magically see, if you have a well-defined set of, criteria that you want to apply, top 2 to 3% of the ideas bubble to the top. The rest of the ideas fall off. And it's those top ideas that then you go forward with. And what you'll find is the teams are incredibly excited because they're not about generating 200 ideas. They're generating, here's 3 really great ideas. And they can get energized behind it. And in fact, at HP, what I used to do was we'd run these sessions, I would pre-allocate $50,000 per idea. So when the team got done and they had the top 3 ideas, each team got $50,000 to take that idea forward, to start working on it. So you put your money where your mouth is as a leader. It isn't just sitting around saying, come up with some ideas and then we'll think about funding it.
Right.
You as a team, I'm challenging you to come up with your best idea, and your best ideas we're going to fund, so they better be good.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
It actually puts a different level of pressure on them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the last one is E is execution. And the mantra that I constantly repeat is ideas without execution is a hobby. And I'm not in the hobby business.
Right.
Right. I'm into making it real. And so there's a whole different kinds of different approaches that you can use to execute. But it's real simple. Focus, ideation, ranking, and execution.
That's great. So on the ranking part of it, and actually, frankly, for all the steps, what kind of time frames do you recommend, right? Because I think we've all been in sessions where, you do an ideation types of things, regardless of the type of business you're in. And man, sometimes those things just go on and on and on. And you're just like, seriously, like what are we doing here? So are there best practices on like length of time for different sections? I mean, obviously execution could depend a lot on how big of an idea it is, but certainly I would think ideation and ranking would have a certain amount of time frame.
Yeah, well, in fact, the way we teach it is the focus, ideation, and ranking. We'll teach that if someone wanted to attend the innovation boot camp that we teach here in Colorado, that's usually over 2 days, but that's teaching skills, not the actual running of it.
Yeah.
For the Marine Corps, we can do focus, ideation, and ranking, assuming they've already got the background material, in 2 to 3 hours total. It includes everything from problem statement definition to running the individual brainstorming, team brainstorming, and then actually do the ranking. And we do one early phase of execution, which is what we call innovation lean canvas. Create a 1-page description of the idea that you can bubble up. Eventually, in the Marine Corps, there's a 1-star that reviews the ideas that come out of these workshops. But we typically never run any phase of the project or any phase of the exercise for more than 35 or 40 minutes. If you get someone locked into 2 hours, they're brain dead. They just can't contribute.
Well, exactly.
They can't contribute anymore. So lots of freaking breaks, lots of collaboration, communications amongst the team. And we've seen some pretty amazing stuff come out of it. And it's not the ideas that we contribute. It's actually unlocking the ideas and the capabilities of everybody participating in a workshop.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously, that's the idea. You want to teach them the skills, and then they're going to have their own unique knowledge of a particular segment or whatever market they happen to be in, and they're going to try and bring those into it, and that's where their value is. Your value is teaching them how to do it.
Yeah, and it's been interesting. We do the Marine Corps VA. This is going to be sacrilegious. I just did brother printing. As an example, I did a workshop for brother printing.
Yeah, that is sacrilegious. All right, we're going to take a break here, but when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about the podcast and how it's been going and what we can expect in the future. See you soon. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Killer Innovations Podcast. I'm Bob O'Donnell, the President and Chief Analyst at Technalysis Research, and filling in as the host today and taking advantage of the opportunity of making your normal host, Mr. Phil McKinney, the guest. So Phil and I are chatting on a whole variety of things, and we thought we'd spend a little bit of time talking about the podcast. It's a meta. It's a podcast talking about the podcast. So we talked a little bit at the beginning about, what led you to do this and what led you to focus on innovation. But you've been doing it a long time, as we talked about. So obviously you got to have some good stories, right? What are some of your most favorite stories from guests or topics that you've covered?
Well, I think, there are some great, topics, some phenomenal guests. I've had.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Oh, sorry. You meant other people. Sorry.
You and Tim and, and all the gang from the Valley, right? But I've had Peter Guber, who's one of the co-owners of the Golden State Warriors. Peter and I had met. We were on the stage speaking at a common event someplace. And then he called me up and interviewed me, and I'm in one of his books. And then we got to become friends. And then he bought the Warriors after that. And then, Bob Metcalf, the founder of 3Com.
Oh, yes.
I knew him way, way, way back in the early days of the 3Com days, and so we got reconnected. But probably some of the more interesting is the early days of podcasting, where some of the companies that were trying to get into the space that turned into completely different companies. So, for instance, back then there was all these what they called podcatching applications and websites. So this is before. Remember, I started podcasting in 2005, so that was before iTunes.
Oh my God!
And so you had all these podcatching apps, right? So that's how you got your podcast down onto your iPod or some early phones that could do that, those kinds of things. And one of those companies was called Odeo, and I was like, Odeo reached out to me when they were first conceiving of the product to give them some feedback. So I gave them some feedback. I was an alpha customer. I actually worked with them pretty closely on their app, etc. Now the question is what company did Odeo become?
I don't know.
Twitter.
Wow. That's pretty wild.
The actual app that became Twitter was an internal system that they were using for tech support for the Odeo app. It was used amongst the internal organization. And when iTunes came out and iTunes support for podcast came out, it crushed that entire industry. All of the podcatching apps, literally within 30 days, were out of business because of Apple. Odeo pivoted and became Twitter.
That's fascinating. Well,
I should have taken equity.
Yeah, no kidding.
If hindsight's 20/20.
If you think about it, a lot of some of the bigger products that are out there, certainly in the tech industry, are things that started out as internal tools, right? AWS, Amazon's web services, that was all their own internal tool for being able to handle all their own orders and everything else. And they realized, hey, wait a minute, we built this infrastructure for us. Maybe we can share it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all over the place across a whole variety of industries. And I think people kind of think that I've got this one idea, and if the idea doesn't work, then I'm done. And then versus saying, maybe I'm down this path, but don't become so, stubborn that this is the only path I'm going to walk, that I don't look to either side, left or right. And literally the Twitter guys went from Odeo to Twitter within 30 days. They completely pivoted the business and launched. Now, if you remember the early days of Twitter with the whale fails and Twitter being down all the time in the early days, that was because it was an internal tool trying to scale and be production.
Right. So back to the podcast stories. Other interesting, companies or people you had on that are memorable.
Yeah, well, I think there's always the memorable ones. Like I said, company, individuals. I think one of the ones that is probably very memorable for me and it's actually a fairly recent show, was with Dean Kamen.
Oh yeah.
So Dean, the inventor of the Segway. If you like your Coca-Cola freestyle machine where you go in and you touch and you pick your different Coke flavors. Dean invented that. Dean and I have known each other for a while, and he and I are working on some projects about aging in place and home health, and how do we think differently given what's going on in the world right now, home health, if we had the home health infrastructure in place, things wouldn't be quite as scary right now with the aging population risks to healthcare. But Dean, it was actually turned out I was doing as an on-stage interview at an event in New Orleans last October, and it went so well, and people just loved the audience was, I don't know, thousands of people in the audience loved it so much. We actually chopped it up and put it out as a podcast. And that show has probably generated some of the top responses from people just interested because of the topic areas.
What in particular do you think, was it just that particular topic of home health care, or was it the methods of innovation being discussed, or what do you think made it particularly?
I think it was a combination. I think a lot of people know of Dean's inventions. They don't know Dean. And then I think so being able to get kind of that insider's look to it and say, wow, he's a normal guy,
right.
But he's very passionate about, having, improving people's lives. But I think it also revealed things that are coming on the line that nobody knows about, right? So he's got a big project going on where he's printing organs.
Wow.
For the U.S. Army. So it's a DoD contract to actually do everything from printing bones to ligaments to organs for organ transplants. And it's an amazing, amazing project that he's got up in his Manchester, New Hampshire headquarters going on. And he's up there in New Hampshire by himself. He's got 800 employees, but 99% of the people would never know who DECA Research is. So I think it was people kind of got the wow effect, like, holy smokes, there's this stuff going on. And also Dean is very passionate about the youth. How do we prepare the kids for the future? So he's the inventor of the first robotics competition.
Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly. No,
Yep.
he is a very interesting guy. Well, that does make for an interesting story. So, look, another topic I wanted to address is the rise of podcasts in general. I mean, you've been doing this for a long time, but we've seen this explosion of podcasts. I forgot to mention, by the way, that I actually also host a podcast that is on the Innovators Network that you should listen to all the time. It's the Tech Pinions podcast. And thank you to Phil and everybody associated with the Innovators Network for getting us on the network. But anyway, but the reality is, there are a lot of podcasts out there, and and they range in quality. I mean, some of the production on some of these things is unbelievable. Some of it's not so good. Been there on both sides of that equation, unfortunately. But what's your kind of take on this podcast movement overall?
Well, I think it's pretty funny because I run into people and they go, "Wow, there's been the whole overnight success of podcasting." I'm going, I don't know about overnight. I've been trudging this thing, and actually it's interesting because now Killer Innovations, we're the longest continuously produced podcast in history now at 15 years. But you look at some of the podcasts and people have come in, whether it be public radio and what they've done. You see what what Gimlet Media did as far as theirs, and that now their acquisition by Spotify and bringing Spotify, into the podcasting world. I think nowadays, if you've got a topic, an area of interest, no matter how nichey it is, you can find a podcast on it. And if there's not a podcast on it, then launch a podcast.
Yeah, well, the tools are so much easier to use. I mean, hardware-wise, you can get a good quality USB microphone you plug into your computer and you use it with regular recording software that you can get for free, and there's all kinds of places to upload this stuff. So yeah, absolutely, it is interesting. And as an old school radio guy, it's a blast for me because I'm like, I get to be like I'm on the radio again. And there's something to be said for just the spoken word and the ability to communicate certain ideas. It's.
Well, I think it plays so well now with also the integrations in automobiles.
Yes.
With things like Android Auto and Apple Auto, it just makes it universal.
Yeah, no, absolutely true. All right, we're going to take another break here, but we will be back talking more innovation with Phil McKinney here on the Killer Innovation Podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Killer Innovations Podcast. I'm Bob O'Donnell, the founder and chief analyst of Technalysis Research, filling in for Phil McKinney only because Phil is our guest today. Phil is getting a chance to be on the receiving end instead of the giving end, so to speak, in terms of the questions. We've been talking a lot about the history of the podcast and the nature of podcasting, some of the interesting stories. I understand as well you've had some interesting run-ins with folks who listen to the program. Yeah, the fans is what actually keeps you motivated, right? You know this, Bob, with your being on the radio and, with your TechPinions podcast. It's getting that feedback or an email from somebody saying, hey, love the show, or they have a question you can answer or whatever. Back in the early days of the podcast, I would regularly let people know where I would be a month or 2 months ahead, like saying, hey, it's now April and June 15th, I will be in London, speaking at this event or that location or whatever. And my very first fan engagement was actually in London. I had a guy reach out to me to say, hey, love to meet you. Can we meet? And so we just happened to pick this pizza place across the street from the hotel and right there in downtown London. And so I'm thinking it's just going to be me and him. And I walk in and the entire restaurant are listeners of the podcast. He put the word out and he filled the entire restaurant. But what is really strange, that first experience is you're sitting there and you realize that you cannot have typical idle conversation, idle chit chat. Because I would go this is back when my daughter just had gotten engaged. My oldest daughter got engaged. I said, my daughter's engaged. And they go, yeah, we know. My son's getting ready to do, he was a nationally ranked fencer. He had a fencing competition come in. I'd go, blah, blah, blah. And Logan's doing it. And they go, yeah, we know. They know everything about you. So any idle chit chat you want to do, there's no way to do kind of an idle. So it actually taught me to be a little bit more private. And then I've had the other extreme of guests. I flew back from London to New York. This is right after HP. We acquired WebOS. And so I again announced I was going to be coming to New York. It was actually a WebOS talk I was given. And flight was delayed, whatever. I finally get to the hotel like at 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. And there's almost a dozen people in the lobby waiting for me that had been hanging there all night, waiting for me to get in and so they could talk to me at 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. People I didn't even know. And these were all WebOS fanboys. And then I've had the strange ones. I've had the stalker problem, right? And one kind of freaks my wife out to where I've had to stop announcing where I'm going to be or whatever. And it's actually died down now. It's died down a lot since I'm no longer at HP because of the profile that HP has. But I've had stalkers here, even here in Colorado. We had a stalker longtime listener to the podcast from California. This individual flew from Sacramento to Denver, drove, and came in the front lobby here at the Cable Labs building. And the Cable Labs staff was a little freaked out, not knowing how to deal with the stalkers. Yeah. It's unfortunately, it's the nature of the beast with mass media. Occasionally you're going to have those kind of situations. But look, the good news is the podcast, from its modest beginnings, has grown into, quite the entity. And we were just chatting during the break. I mean, you guys... obviously, it started out as an individual podcast. So take us through a little bit of the history of then moving to the Innovators Network and then getting on to Biz Talk Radio.
Yeah, so the Innovators Network, we launched that 2.5 years ago, I'm guessing. And the network is a combination of two things. One is that it's a host distributor for innovation podcasts, so such as yours and Tim and Ben's show, TechPinions, which we host and distribute for you. We have Killer Innovations. We also have a second show that I do called 5 Minutes to New Ideas. That's a relatively new show, but it's a short format version. You can listen to it really, really quickly. So that's 5 Minutes to New Ideas. And then we have Kim McNicholas on innovation. So Kim being a former journalist at Forbes. She used to do a lot of with Forbes video, and people in the Valley know Kim really well. So we also host her show, which tends to focus more on medical tech innovation, is where Kim's efforts are at right now. So, we started that, again, two and a half years ago, primarily because we saw a lot of shows having a hard time getting any attention. Really good shows. So we wanted to create a framework and a platform that allowed up-and-comer podcasters to get onto a platform that gets them distributed on iHeart, gets them on Spotify, gets promoted off of the following we have on Killer Innovations, to look to see if we can't partner up with them and drive it that way. And then July, a couple of years ago, we got asked to syndicate the show on BizTalk Radio, and we're now on 62, 63 radio stations now in the United States.
That's fantastic. And my understanding is you're not obviously, I mean, the beauty of podcast, pardon me, is that, people can listen to it anywhere in the world, but and which is fantastic. But Biz Radio is around the world in certain places as well.
Yes, it is. They stream, and they have the over-the-top offerings and all of that. And for Killer Innovations today, natively, not counting the BizTalk distribution, 55% of our traffic or listener base is in the U.S. The rest is around the world. You can think of it as all the, at least the top ones are the English-speaking, Canada, UK, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand. But then the next two is China and India. Are the top downloaded countries.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, it's funny because I used to, when I would post some of my originally old radio shows to see where people would pick it up. It was all over the place. I remember I was excited because I saw that somebody in Vatican City was listening to my old radio show. So.
Given that you did your college, you went to Notre Dame for college. There
you go. Anyway, well, hey, Phil, it's been a real pleasure. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on the show and chat with you. Two old Glenwood boys coming back together. Obviously, I wish you continued success with the program and look forward to having the chance to come back on as a guest. But any final thoughts for everybody as we head our way out?
No, again, I'm just so thankful for the support from the fan base for 15 years, and we're now starting 16. We got a lot of great new shows coming up, so you want to subscribe and listen.
All right, sounds good. Well, time to tune out. Once again, I'm Bob O'Donnell, filling in for Phil McKinney here on the Killer Innovation Podcast.